Good evening, everyone. We're going to begin our program, and I was waiting a minute or two because we have a very special guest, but you'll find out when he comes in. I'm Michelle Kidwell-Gilbert. Can you hear me in back? Wonderful. Chair of the Archaeology Committee of the National Arts Club. For those of you who are not familiar with the National Arts Club, founded in 1898, we're a 501c3 nonprofit based in Gramercy Park, which I think is one of the most beautiful parts of Manhattan, with a mission to stimulate, foster, and promote public interest in the arts. Annually, the club offers more than 150 free programs to the public, including exhibitions, theatrical and musical performances, lectures, and readings. For more information about the Arts Club, visit us at nationalartsclub.org or find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Today's program, entitled The Ideal or Not So Ideal Greek Woman, is unique for many reasons. It is the first lecture by Professor Jenifer Neils, whom I have long wished to speak at the club, and I'm delighted that she's doing so today. I thank you personally, Jenifer. It is presented in collaboration with the American School of Classical Studies at Athens, an extraordinary cultural organization which next January 24th will be granted the National Arts Club highest honor, a gold medal. And that is such a special honor that the club does not often give. I trust that many in this audience will join us for that celebratory event. Tonight's topic is one that fascinates me particularly after attending a lecture on an analogous subject many years ago by Joan Breton Connolly at a College Art Association annual conference. In 2009, Alan Shapiro treated Athenian women in connection with worshiping women, ritual and reality in classical Athens exhibition at the Onassis Cultural Center in New York, which he had co-curated. Did many of you see that? It was a superb show. You did, I did, Jenifer, and I see a couple of more hands also. I miss the fact that the Onassis Center no longer has exhibitions the way they used to in New York. They were wonderful, the symposiums in their building also. Let us hope it returns. 2 years later, Joan herself discussed priestesses in classical Greece. Both scholars have written on the subject, but the specific volume I wish to mention is Women in the Athenian Agora, published by the American School, as it includes Pliny, and I have my copy with me. So if anyone wants to see it during the reception, please come up. You're looking at Pliny here. Many tales abound, such as how she became one of the wealthiest of women in Greece and her trial for impiety, concluding with her being acquitted after bearing her breasts. Although I must admit, I think the veracity of this is somewhat moot. Pliny served as a model for two of antiquity's greatest artists, the painter Apelles in his Aphrodite rising from the sea, and more relevant for us tonight, her lover Praxiteles, whose nude sculpture, the Aphrodite of Canados, which is what you're seeing, was the first monumental female nude in ancient Greek art. Permit me to quote from Pausanias' description of Greece. Pliny once asked of him, Praxiteles, the most beautiful of his works, and the story goes that, lover-like, he agreed to give it, but refused to say which he thought the most beautiful. So a slave of Pliny rushed in saying that a fire had broken out in the studio of Praxiteles, and the greater number of his works were lost, though not all destroyed. Praxiteles at once started to rush through the door, crying that his labor was all wasted, if indeed the flames had caught his satyr and Eros. But Pliny bid him stay and be of good courage, for he had suffered no grievous loss, but had been trapped into confessing, which were the most beautiful of his works. So Pliny chose the statue of Eros. Similar to a theme and variation, Emily Adroit, gorgeous Pliny contributes to the portrayal of a renowned literary heroine. One of my favorite authors is Arthur Conan Doyle, born 1859 in Edinburgh, Scotland, and died 1930. A sieve for knowledge, as well as son of the artist Charles Adamant Doyle. I assume that Conan Doyle's parent, with his creative bent, related the preceding account, which the writer incorporates into his first short story from 1892. And you all have read that story, whether you realize it or not. A Scandal in Bohemia. Sherlock Holmes, requested to retrieve a photograph, is initially ineffectual. The means for his success lies in the great detective assuming the guise of a swooning cleric, allowed into the house where the compromising picture is secreted, arranging for someone outside to set off a smoke bomb and scream fire, thereby noting the hiding place when the owner of the image rushes to retrieve it. The question next becomes, was there any parallel relationship, direct or indirect, between Praxiteles and his own father, an Athenian sculptor named Casidotus the Elder? And by now you realize my pronunciation of Greece is lacking, but not my love of it. Casidotus the Elder, as there was between the two Doyles, okay? Forgive me, I am interrupting myself midway. I want you all to know we have Ambassador Sicarius, the ambassador extraordinary to the United Nations.
Sorry for having late. Please continue because we have to continue the event. Thank you for your invitation, of course.
I told everyone I was waiting for something special was coming, and I would introduce at that moment. And I thank you all for this attendance for joining us. Thank you so much. Okay, and I will send you a copy of my introduction. If I may recap very briefly, this is a wonderful program tonight, and you have Jenifer Neils seated right opposite you. And I mentioned with women, I'm on to Pliny and Praxiteles' model, mistress, exemplar, and how she is picked up by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle for his Scandal in Bohemia. And I'm now saying, at this point, was there anything parallel between Pliny, and was there anything parallel with Praxiteles and his own father, an Athenian sculptor named Casidotus the Elder, as there was between the two Doyles, artist and writer, and the artist who told the story to his writer son? Indeed, yes, for Casidotus' most famous creation, and you're seeing it, was Irene and Plautus, peace and wealth. And the name of the woman Holmes refers to as that woman, does someone want to tell me? Irene Adler. No idea if the surname Adler held any significance to Doyle, relating as it does to the initial letter in the Greek alphabet, perhaps alluding to Pliny, or now we call her Irene, being an alpha woman. I leave that perplexing puzzle to our exceedingly astute audience. Curiously, the given name of an Australian lady detective whose exploits in Miss Fisher's Mysteries I relished viewing a few years ago on PBS is Phryne. Coincidental, or perhaps my hypothesis has a broad currency. Clearly, Greek women matter, not just for Greece, but for numerous civilizations spanning diverse time periods. Now you know the building, of course. A related query is, did Greek art entice our writer? I suggest yes. The Edinburgh collection of Parthenon casts was on display between 1907 and 1911. Although no longer residing in the city of his birth, Conan Doyle took a photograph of the Parthenon, this is his own photograph, in 1907, approximately 100 years after the marbles were transferred from Athens to London. Jenifer Neils, holder of a doctorate from Princeton University, is a woman who truly matters, but very differently from Phryne. The Elsie B. Smith Professor Emeritus of Liberal Studies at Case Western Reserve University, she learned to appreciate how material culture can inform us about the past through her archaeological excavations in Italy, namely Tuscany and Sicily, as well as Greece. She curated 3 major international loan exhibitions. In the 1990s, Goddess and Polis, the Panathenaic Festival in ancient Athens, the beginning of the 20th century, Coming of Age in ancient Greece, Images of Childhood from the Classical Past, and more recently, Ippos, the Horse in ancient Athens. Jenifer has provided full-time service to the American School of Classical Studies at Athens, with 5 years as managing committee chair and 5 years as director. It gives me great pleasure in welcoming Dr. Neils to the podium.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle. I'm delighted to be here. Although it's a little daunting to talk about women with this audience where we have not only Mary Lefkowitz, whose source book is indispensable for us who look at women, Alan Shapiro, who worked on one of the great edited volumes about women. And she's not here, but I do want to credit Sarah Pomeroy, who in 1975 wrote Goddesses, Wives, Slaves, Whores and Slaves, okay. Anyway, which was really set us all off to studying ancient women. Now, I'm looking at this topic from, as Michelle mentioned, a material culture point of view. So we're going to have a romp through many works of art. I was inspired by the story of Zeuxis, who was in the wealthiest Sicilian city of Croton and was asked to do a painting of Helen. Sometimes some sources say Helen, some people say just the most beautiful woman. And it was interesting because he couldn't find one exemplar of this, so he had to select 5 maidens to strip for him, and he combined the features of these 5 women. So in that sense, maybe there was no ideal woman, but it got me to thinking about this topic. I have a few bona fides in the area of women. I did write a book for the British Museum called Women in the Ancient World. And as I was writing this book, the editorial staff changed, and I was getting some kind of perplexing directions from London, so I went over to meet with the editorial staff. And they showed me some examples of what they had in mind, and they said, which were short, mostly picture books. They said, we have one on cats, we have one on dogs, and we have one on horses. And I said, I'll do men. But anyway, I finally won them around to my point of view. The next sort of challenge was the book cover, and I thought this gorgeous Tanagra figurine in the British Museum, because it's 2 women, would be perfect for the cover of the book. But I soon discovered that the author does not pick the cover of the book. The marketing staff do. And this is the least representative image of a woman you could find from ancient Greece. A young girl in a short dress, athletic, running, showing a bared breast. It's probably actually possibly a Spartan girl running a race at Olympia, but whatever it is, it's not what we normally see when we look at ancient women. There was a German edition, and they picked a better cover, in my opinion. But anyway, but the wonderful thing about the British Museum and writing for them is that I could use any and all objects that I wanted from their collection. They have everything from a Bronze Age spinning, spindle whirl, as it's called, used in spinning, from the excavations at Troy, discovered by Schliemann, to this portrait head of what's thought to be Cleopatra, although we're not entirely sure, and it doesn't look anything like Elizabeth Taylor. But they also had the realia, the things that were used by women in their daily life, things like the comb and this chatelaine, which is a bunch of bronze cosmetic tools. This is even on the lower right, it's a hair roller. They curled their hair with rollers back in antiquity. Some of you may not know what this is, but it is actually a clay model of a uterus. Yes. I once showed it to a gynecologist, and she said, well, they don't really look like that. But anyway, this is an Etruscan votive object at a healing sanctuary. But they also have this little amulet, which is kind of interesting. It was worn possibly by women. And you can see it actually is a uterus with the fallopian tubes. And it has a little crank on the side, so you could open it or close it, depending on whether you wanted to get pregnant or not. Maybe we could employ this today. The only thing I couldn't find in the British Museum was this object, which is a vaginal speculum. So I had to go to a medical history museum and find one. It really wasn't much use in antiquity. They even thought that the uterus floated around the body, so maybe they were looking for it, but it didn't really serve much function. And finally, the last thing I want to show you is this beautiful Etruscan sarcophagus of a very wealthy woman whose name is inscribed there. There's another one like it, a matching one of the same family in Italy, but what the British Museum did, and what most museums don't do, is that they saved the bones. They saved the skeleton from the inside of this. Normally, art museums would throw these things out, but they were saved, and they managed to do some study about this woman. She had a kind of an injury to her hip, which suggested that she was a rider, actually, that she rode horses. The Etruscan women were very liberated. But they also brought in a forensic crew, and they did a reconstruction of her face. And as you can see, she's much more younger and more beautiful in her sarcophagus image than she probably was in real life. And this is one of the challenges about looking at images of ancient women, is that they obviously want to look more beautiful and attractive, and so we don't get a real sense of their appearance in antiquity. Now let's go to Greece, where I'm going to bracket this lecture by some of the earliest images of women, and then one at the end from late antiquity. And in the middle, we'll look at Greek art from mostly the 5th and the 4th centuries BC. But I want to start with these Cycladic marble figurines. These are from the Metropolitan Museum, because the very first art that we encounter from the ancient Greek world are these early Bronze Age marble. We call them figurines, but some can be almost as tall as I am, I believe, one in the National Museum is. They are made of marble. They're made of island marble, as later Greek sculpture was, and they're predominantly female. There are a few male musicians, but mostly we have these female figures. And some of them are, like the very early one on the left, look slightly pregnant. But they're all characterized by this pose of folding their arms across their bellies. They were found in, we don't know much about them because a lot of them were illegally excavated, but they were in tombs, and they don't stand up, they lie down. Here's some examples from various contexts, and they look a little more pregnant. So these could have been fertility objects of some sort. And it got me thinking, why are they all with this, what we call them FAF, folded arm figurines? And why are they all in this pose? It's easy to sculpt, I guess, but they could have their hands at their sides. And that made me look at pregnant women who actually do stand like this, and I found a few examples to suggest that maybe all these figurines, even though they're very abstracted, are meant to be fertility and showing off the female abdomen. And one last example is this one, which shows the stretch marks following pregnancy, and we think that's what it is anyway. Anyway, so I'm going to now move into the realm of different types of women that we find, that we encounter in ancient Greek art and mythology, starting with some mythological figures, because these stereotypes do tell us a lot about at least how males or cultures were thinking about women. And so I'm starting with what are really witches or scary women, starting with the Gorgon Medusa, who could turn you to stone. Another female with fabulous talents was Circe, who changed Odysseus's men into swine. Here. And what's interesting about Circe and some other of these early witches is that they do this with pharmaca. That's the origin of our word pharmacy, but they mix things in their magic bowls there. You can see it falling to the side, and can do things like change men or make them younger in some cases, perform magic tricks. And then finally, Medea. This is a beautiful crater in the Cleveland Museum of Art, which I had a chance to publish and study, who leaves her dead children here on the altar, her two sons, as she escapes from Corinth. So these are typical images that you would find, I think, in a misogynist society. They're not attractive, pleasant images of women. More ambiguous is this woman, Pandora. Every culture has its first woman. You think of Eve or Lilith. But Pandora was the first woman, and I just want to inform you that she did not have a box, as all later art shows, but her evils were kept in a pithos, and this is a mistranslation in a later period where the word pixis, or the word pithos, got changed into pixis. But she had a jar, and we know from Homer that there were jars in which evils were kept and good things were kept. So she has the jar of evils, and opens it and lets them loose in the world, and that's why Hesiod calls her a beautiful evil. But she has other names. Pandora means all gifts, all giving. And Anessadora, as she's described on this cup in the British Museum, you can just see Anessadora here, it shows her being fabricated from clay by the smith god Hephaestus and being adorned by Athena. I'll show you another image of that, a drawing that shows it better. But she's named Anessadora means that person who sends out goods, gifts, Dora, to the world. So the Athenians at least had a more positive image about Pandora than Hesiod or some of the other stories. Here's another image of her where she's standing like a kind of stiff statue coming to life with the help of Athena and all the gods who give her gifts, hence the name Pandora. Now, one of the reasons I believe that she has a more positive persona is not only because she's made by these gods, but that she appears on the Parthenon. And that's surprising to some people. Why would this beautiful evil be on the Parthenon? I just want to remind you of what the Parthenon looks like and the fact that it has lots of sculpture and the pediments. I'm going to show you a Metrope in a minute, one of these panels, and of course the frieze is there, and we'll come to that at the end because I never give a lecture in which I do not include the Parthenon frieze at some point. here is the interior of the Parthenon, somebody's reconstruction of it, with this golden ivory masterpiece of the sculptor Phidias from the mid-5th century. And the base of it had figures applied in a narrative scene. And that scene, we are told by Pausanias, who describes this statue at great length when he visits Athens, and the base. Otherwise, we wouldn't know really what it looked like, because we have surviving copies like this, which are hard to read. But Pandora is in the center, and she's being given these gifts. And I think that's very important that the Athenians, with their great statue of Athena, believe that they also are lauding her as the maker of the first woman. And they're kind of abrogating this to Athens, even though we don't really know where this took place. But she's like the Athenians, she's being born from the soil and always is associated with the land itself being made of clay. Now, the other image I want to show you of a woman on the Parthenon from mythology is Helen. And this is badly abraded, like they all are. It's one of the North Metopes, which has the scenes of the fall of Troy. And one of the important episodes features Helen running to a statue. And this is Aphrodite here, we can tell because there's a little eros. And in the next Metope, Menelaus is coming to reclaim her after the Greeks win the war. Here's a vase image of it. And I think this is less about Helen and more about Menelaus. And I always wonder if there's sort of an Athenian take on this, in that they show him running to kill Helen after her elopement with Paris. But in fact, the scene shows him dropping his sword, because once he looks at her, and the story goes that she unveiled herself, that he immediately fell back in love with her. And then when you read the Odyssey, they're at home, she's spinning some wool, and he's sitting around, and they lived happily ever after. But I wonder if the Athenians thought that he wasn't a real man because he didn't take vengeance on her. Finally, I just want to show you Penelope, who's another stereotype of Greek women, and this is a very nice vase that was found in Chiusi that shows her at her loom, in which she wove, like a good wife, a funeral shroud for her father-in-law, but unweaves it, of course, so that she can keep the suitors at bay. And she's in this very mournful pose. I mean, that pose is so much associated with her character that we can find fragmentary pieces like this piece of sculpture, which actually was from Persepolis. Then we know it's Penelope, because this action or this pose becomes her persona as a kind of mourning figure, a sad, bereft wife. Okay, now let's turn to some of what we might call real images of women, although we should be very careful in saying that, because these are not snapshots. These are obviously interpretations. They are made by male artists, by and large, but they do reflect, I think, social life in the Athenian world, starting with the figure of the mourner. And on geometric vases, late geometric vases, this is around 700 BC, our first figurative art in Athens. One of the predominant themes on vases, which were used in the Greek funerals, are the laying out of the body, the prothesis. And what's interesting about these, what's the role of women? Now, death and birth are considered miasma. They're pollution in ancient Greece. You didn't go near a woman who had just given birth, for instance, or you didn't go near the dead if you could avoid it. And so women were charged with taking care of the dead. And on this vase, you can see that those who are attending the bier are actually women. You may not believe me, but you see these little marks coming out of their armpits. Those are their breasts. So these are women. And they're very close to the bier, and even here, probably she's probably flipping away the flies or something. But and then this theme continues throughout Athenian art. Here's a beautiful funerary plaque, and you can see that the women who are drawn in white now, and very clearly women, are very close to this deceased youth on his bier, even a little girl here. And the men are at the back, and they're saluting, but they don't get near the corpse. And I think this is interesting because, well, we'll come to more examples of this, but this is the typical role of women, is to mourn the dead. And it has made me think, and I just throw this out, it's not provable, that during the period of the Peloponnesian War, when we have this mass production of white ground, these are vases, oil vases placed in the grave, they're given a white slip, and they're filled with oil, perfumed oil. The vast majority of these show women, either preparing to visit the grave or visiting the grave at certain intervals, just as they do in Greece today, to mourn the dead. And you often see the grave stele here. And these were produced during the time of the Peloponnesian War, when the men were off fighting and dying. And it's a period when I think that women may even have painted these vases. There's no way to tell, none of them are signed, but their drawing is very delicate, and the themes are very much related to women's roles as mourners. Okay, another important role is the wife, the marriage of a young Athenian girl, usually 14 years of age, marrying a man who had completed his military service and would have been about 30. However, when you look at these images of the wedding, you see the couple getting on the ancient equivalent of the limousine, a chariot. It's a nighttime procession. We have torches. And you can see that he looks like a nice young guy. So again, this is an idealized image of the Athenian wedding. They almost certainly did not ride to the groom's house, which is what the bride did. It was basically a transfer from her childhood home to that of her husband. There was no real ceremony other than this transition. There's a wonderful vase at the Met, which I urge you to see, a much earlier one, which shows what was probably the real wedding ceremony, where they're in a cart, not a chariot, and it's being pulled by mules, and they go to the house of the groom. So it's not such a fancy procession as it's shown in classical art as mostly this rather idealized procession. Well, after being a wife, the next job was to be a mother. And of course, the image of the mother and child is one of the most ubiquitous in art of all periods. And in ancient art, we have Isis and Horus. We have the mother and child. And once in a while, we get a Greek goddess holding a child, like Artemis, who was the protector of young children. But more often than not, you get an image like this, which is the nurse. You would not want this woman as your nurse, probably, holding this little child. And that relates to, so we've already seen this thanks to Michelle. We've seen the Kephisodotos Irenian Plutos, which looks very much like, a Renaissance or later Madonna and Child. However, rather than being a Madonna and Child, it is Irene. It's a personification of peace which brings about wealth. So the child wealth is here. This is not a mother and child. This is a personification of a concept of the results of peace. So what do we see when we actually see mothers? We have scenes like this, and what they are doing is they are handing off the kid to the nanny or the nursemaid, as you see here. This is one of the rare family scenes, and what the woman and her household slaves were mostly doing was working on this loom or spinning, as we'll see in a minute. The other kind of scene you get is these funerary stele, where the woman has probably died in childbirth, and you have the maid holding the child there. And there are some scenes like that. So it's not, we never get the happy family. One of our scholar friends said the only happy family is the satyr family in ancient Greek art. Because they had their slaves, their household slaves, to do things like feed the babies, take care of them. They had wet nurses who actually came, they were non-Athenians. This one, you can see she has tattoos on her arm, and she's nursing this child. And this isn't, I couldn't, there are very few scenes of childbirth. It was not, I guess, considered aesthetic. The Egyptians represented it, but the Greeks didn't. But you'll often see the mother this after childbirth, or maybe having even died in childbirth, was very common, and another family member holding the newborn. Much of the time, women were, as we know from literature, were kept indoors, and they were very busy producing garments and linens and things for the family, because this was a very demanding labor to make clothes and textiles. You had to spin the wool, card it, spin it, wash it, dye it, and then put it on the loom and weave whatever you're weaving. It took about, I don't know, let's say 5 hours to spin enough wool to weave for 1 hour. So this was something that you hear about women doing constantly, even while they were taking care of the children or preparing meals, whatever, they were always spinning, and the household slaves would be contributing to this part of daily life and the economy. One other example of labor is very problematic, because this is a type of image that we don't know how to interpret, in spite of a lot of attempts. This is a water jar that you take to the fountain house, and you fill with water. You can pour and you can carry it on its sides. It's a very architectonic vase, which may have inspired these scenes of the fountain house. And here are details so you can see it more clearly. We rarely get architecture on Greek vases, but this is a whole series of these from the late 6th century that show what look like young women going and fetching water. But the question is, did these women, who are mostly kept indoors, really go out and get the water? Are these slaves? And there's even some thought that these were prostitutes, because the names are sometimes inscribed in the background, and they're names like Goldie and Pretty and other things like that. So we don't really know what this represents. But we do know that most of these were made for export from Athens, and they went to Etruria, so to Italy. So they may have had something to do with a water cult in Italy. But they do show, what was one, which was a major task for the household, which was to bring water back. On a somewhat lower scale of work or whatever, we have young women who entertained men, often at the Greek symposium or banquet, as dancers or musicians. And this is very common, particularly on Greek vases that were used for drinking wine, of which this is just the center part. And just to relieve you from looking at vases, this is this wonderful bronze uptown in the Metropolitan Museum, which is known as the Baker Dancer, after one of the owners. But it's an extraordinary tour de force of drapery, of casting a bronze drapery, beautiful veiled dancer. This was an occupation of young, attractive girls, and you can see that here is one of them dancing in front of this young man, and she's very, very young girl. She has short hair, which to some people suggests that she might be a slave, as many of these prostitutes were. I had a student looking at this vase, and they entitled it "Stop in the Name of Love." Anyway, so I always think of that when I see it. But there was dancing, there was drinking, and the women even climbed up on the couch and drank with the men, and these were clearly not wives, even though these drinking parties took place in the andrones, the male, the dining room of the house. And then there were, after all the drinking and carousing, there were lots of other activities that went on with these figures who are presumably, although there's been an attempt by younger scholars to suggest that this is conjugal bliss, I sort of doubt it, because these are always on drinking cups used by men, so they're meant to appeal to the male gaze. And the male the male attitude towards women, another kind of stereotype is that they were wildly sexy, so they had to be kept at home. And some of the images suggest this. Whether these were meant to amuse the banqueters or whatever, we don't know, but this woman with dildos, and I think this is a very charming one where she's planted these phalluses in the ground and she seems to be watering them. In the hope, I guess, that they'll grow bigger, I don't know. But last in this sort of list of possible courtesans, there's prostitutes, concubines, whatever, is this really interesting vase, again in the Metropolitan, which many people have written about, even though it's unique in the fact that it shows a doorway and a roof. It's on a wine jug, a special jug that was used in the festival of Dionysus, where you take one of these jugs, called a kous, and you would guzzle it. And they come in different sizes. There are even little ones for children, but this is a full-sized one. And this man is coming to a doorway and clearly banging on it. He's just been at a party because he has his lyre here. And on the other side is a woman who's coming up looking with a lamp, so it's night, looking very tentative about answering the door. So again, we get this spectrum. Is this the husband coming home to his wife, or is this a man who's, drunk and boisterous and is visiting a brothel? So you can take your pick, but my thinking is that whether it's the husband or the wife or someone in a brothel, the doorway is very important as a symbol, because we know from ancient comedy that this phrase was used, a metaphor for having intercourse was breaking through the door or going through the gates. And so this unusual architecture on this scene, I think, makes it clear that whether this is a household slave or a prostitute, the result is going to be the same. Okay, we've heard about Phryne. The high-class courtesans in Athens were not Athenians. They came from abroad, usually. I mean, Phryne was from Boeotia, northern, outside of Athens. And this is that famous scene where she's on trial for well, she was not believing in the God. I can't remember. What? Impiety. Thank you. I couldn't think of it. Yeah, on piety. And her lawyer here is pleading her case, and he's not being very successful, so he pulls off her garment. And again, sort of like Menelaus seeing Helen, they're so enraptured that they let her off the hook. I mean, the penalty for impiety was death, so this was a good ploy because it saved her. And as Michelle mentioned, she was the model for Praxiteles as well as Apelles for the Aphrodite of Canados, the first nude female statue. And it's not just nudity per se, but we have to have a context for this, and you can see there's a water jug here and she's picking up her garment, so it's as if she's just come out of the bath. She's not just parading around nude for the delectation of male figures. But then this was a cult statue, so it was not. supposed to conjure an image of Phryne as a prostitute. Another woman who was a prostitute and became very famous in Athens was, of course, Aphasia, and who was so learned that, you know, she spoke with men, Socrates and others, and of course, Pericles. We don't know if this is her portrait, but in fact, we don't really know much about her, and much of it is fabricated. But it brings up this issue of to what extent were women educated. And we don't have any evidence that they went to school. They were apprenticed to their mothers, they learned to weave, they learned to cook or whatever. So again, here's another, this wasn't intentional, all these vases are in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, but this is really one that I was really interested in. Because when we were doing our exhibition on coming of age in ancient Greece, we had to address this issue of, you know, we know boys were educated, we know they went to school, we know they carried these little wax tablets with a stylus and recited Homeric poetry, but we have no evidence that girls ever went outside the house till they were married. And here's one girl taking another, probably a younger girl, by the hand, and she's got that little tablet and stylus, so is she going to school? And we had to confront this question in our show, because we put it in the show as sort of a questionable piece. But what this shows is very important not to just look at the front of the vase, but you need to go around and look at the outside. And what do we have on the outside? We have, again, older women confronting younger women in these pairs. This is, I think, the only scene where you see women speaking to each other, and what it looks like and what it mimics are the very prevalent scenes of male courtship, where an older man is courting a younger boy, giving him gifts or whatever, paired, and it's exactly here. So this led us to suggest that maybe this is kind of a symposium joke, haha, girls don't go to school. But then it occurred to me that maybe this is an example of Athenians trying to represent Spartan girls who did go to school. They had a very different life from Athenian girls, and they were known to be lesbians, and according to some authors, of course, the Athenian authors are always denigrating the Spartans, but maybe this is an example of them representing Spartan girls. All right, let's move on to a sort of higher ground here with the priestess. There were priestesses in ancient Greece, and there were women who had important roles in religion, and we think of this as one way we can give women some agency. But I'm slightly skeptical of that. The priestess is known to hold the key. That's her attribute. So when we see a woman holding a key, we say, oh, this is a priestess. It's kind of like being the concierge. You know, you open the temple, you clean it, you close it. But the most important ritual in ancient Greece was the sacrifice of an animal. And the only person who did that was the priest, male priest. So, shaking their heads. Sometimes we don't see women doing sacrifice. They do carry the knife for the slaying of the animal in a basket, and here's a young girl known as a basket bearer, a kanephoros, and in that basket we know is the knife. The knife that kills the animal is immediately polluted because it's shed blood. And so, again, is that an honor to carry this thing, or is it just because the men don't want to carry it that we give it to the girl who leads the procession? Just some open questions. I want to show you one other cup. This may be the last one I show you, where we see a woman who looks like a priestess with her basket pouring wine onto making a libation on an altar. And there's a incense burner here. On the outside of this cup, again, we see scenes of courtship. In this case, men with women they're paired again, and one of these men has a money sack, which is a clear indication that he's buying the favors of this woman, and that these are probably prostitutes. Mary Beard once wrote about this, and she said that, again, it's a symposium joke. The man is drinking, and on the outside everybody sees these courtship scenes with courtesans, And then when he gets to the bottom of his wine, he sees the stay-at-home wife who's loyally making a sacrifice. I don't buy that at all, because I think what this woman is doing is making a sacrifice to Aphrodite, who's the goddess of sex, to Aphrodisia, and is either for good customers in the future or past customers, and that it's going to be taken, as a whole, as, these scenes relate to this priestess of Aphrodite. It's only in the Christian period that we don't think, we don't have a god of sex, as they did in antiquity. One of the best known and long-serving priestesses of Athena was Lysimache. This may be a portrait of her. She was quite old, and there was a famous portrait of her. We have the statue based on the Acropolis. But I'm going to turn finally to the Parthenon frieze topic I often discuss. And we have the priestess right in the middle of the east, the main entrance, above the main entrance to the temple, is a priestess being served by two young girls. And she's back to back with the priest and this child. And even though there are many scholars who believe this child is a girl, I have tried in my work to definitively prove that this is a boy. The priest is holding a piece of cloth, which was the gift to Athena on her birthday, the so-called peplos, and they seem to be, in my opinion, folding it up, and the ceremony is over. The reason we can tell that this is a boy on the right is because of the length of his garment. Girls never, I mean never, show their ankles, which are considered sexy. Their drapery goes right smack down to the ground, as you can see here with the girl with the doves. It's puddling over her feet. You would never see the ankles being shown. And here with this child, even though people have looked at the hair, the rear end, in all different ways, they never really looked at the length of this garment, which proves that if you look up and you see feet and ankles, you know it's a male figure. But what I really want to talk about are the women on the east. There are, just to remind you about the Parthenon frieze, there are cavalry, there are chariot races, there are the procession where young men are carrying musical instruments or water or bringing the animals. But when you get to the east, there are 29 women shown, which is quite substantial. And then finally we have the peplos scene down here with the priestess. But this is flanked on either side by these rows of women who are bringing sacrificial equipment. They're dressed differently. There are two types of women, in other words. There's this one who has her arms bared and her hair up, and she seems to be, we would interpret her as a young woman. And there are those who are completely covered. Sorry, she has her hair down, I should say, these two. And then there are women like this who are enveloped in their mantles, and they have their hair up. And these are probably older women. So we have a difference here between the young virgins and the wives or older women. If you sort these out, and they're mixed up, I mean, they're mixed, but they're coming from both directions, the north and the south. On the south, there are 6 of these women, and on the north, there are 4. One of my graduate students was studying this, and she showed this, and I said, what is 6 and 4? It's 10. And this was a very important number in ancient Athens, because there were 10 eponymous heroes, which under the democracy gave their names to the different tribal units into which the population was divided. And they appear near the gods at the center of the frieze, and on one side there are 6 of these, and on the other side there are 4. And I said, that's really interesting that we have 10 of these women. And so I suggested in my book that maybe these are eponymi. There's no such term in ancient Greek, but the wives of the heroes, because heroes always have a consort. There was always a female counterpart, not named. And the reason this is important, it's not just a visual thing, it's because at the time of the Parthenon in 451, Pericles passed a very important piece of legislation which gave new power to women. It was called the Citizenship Decree, and it stated that in order for your child to be an Athenian citizen and partake in its responsibilities and all the benefits, you had to have an Athenian citizen father, and your mother had to be the daughter of a citizen. So this, I believe, enhanced the role of women, although some people think during the democracy they weren't as powerful, but I think this shows their importance to not only the family, but to the polis, to the city, that they could in some way represent the tribal divisions of Athens. Okay, you can believe that or not. But I'm going to end with my other bracketing object, which I started my book with for the British Museum, an amazing object from late antiquity, from the 4th century AD, which was, it's a silver gilt box about a half a yard in length, which is one of the prizes of the British Museum. It was part of the Esquiline treasure hoard of silver objects, which was found on the Esquiline Hill in Rome, and ended up, about 56 of the pieces ended up in the British Museum, including this box, which is called Projectas casket, because on the front we have, encircled in a wreath, a woman named Projecta and her husband. And it says here, the inscription to Projecta is a Christian inscription. Even though the imagery on this vase with these little putti, cupids and everything is completely classical, Greek, Roman, it is for a woman who was Christian. And there are 3 images of her on this box, and I believe they show the 3 roles of the ideal woman in Greek and Roman antiquity. First of all, the wife, and notice she's the one who's holding the marriage contract. The mistress of the household, she's shown here holding a hairpin and a mirror, but she has attendants on either side, and it was a very important role of the Roman matron to run the business of the household. And finally, just below on one of the sides, we have Aphrodite, the sexy woman, which I think was the other important role that women performed in antiquity within the marriage. And this, I remind you, is Christian, and yet we still have this classical imagery of the nude female. This is Aphrodite on her shell, of course, but it still, I think, has an allusion to the role of the wife. So I'm going to end here with, this is from 400, 380 AD. And so it's been a big romp through all this imagery, but I'd be happy to answer questions if you have.
Wonderful, and I thank you very much. I love the image that Jenifer ended with, and I'm thinking, because in addition to ancient art, I taught Renaissance, and you have sacred and profane love.
Yes,
And
right,
so
very
we
good.
have it right here. It begins, as so much else does in Greece, that we take from it. Do we have time for some questions? Yes, Arlene.
Now, the reference to slaves, I was thinking that a lot of this is only in wealthy households. That the slaves were not prevalent in poor families.
Yeah, this is a perennial problem that we know very little about slaves. There's no literature, very little literature about them. Of course, they weren't wealthy enough to commission beautiful grave monuments. They didn't have elaborate burials with their jewelry and things like that. So it's very hard to get at.
There were families that couldn't afford the slaves.
Well, actually, almost every family had slaves. And the slaves were Greeks who had been conquered in battles abroad. I mean, they weren't, some of them were from Thrace, the midwives, they were probably slaves. But they were household slaves, and then there were ones that worked in the mines, there were ones that worked in agriculture, but they were very prevalent, but because they were not, I mean, it's true, what we know most about are the elites. That's true almost in any ancient society.
I see a hand over there. Yes.
I was curious about the sarcophagus that you mentioned with the woman who was like much prettier in the rendering art sarcophagus versus the one that they used like the software to recreate her face where it looked like she was much older and like less attractive. I'm just wondering like how were they able to do that based off just like the bone structure that they found? I feel like that's like such a jump that they would have made from like skeleton that they found in the sarcophagus to the actual rendering of her face.
So you're asking a question about forensic?
Yeah, that. Yeah, basically.
Yeah, the forensic. Well, this is, you know, the real frontier in archaeology is science. And we can learn so much by looking at skeletons, not just forensic recreations, which are pretty accurate because this is not a new field particularly, but looking at the bones and figuring out the pathologies and how people lived, what they ate, where they were from. One of my favorite images, I didn't bring it in here, is the study of a woman's teeth, and it turns out that one particular tooth is very worn down and it's from cutting thread. And so we can learn a tremendous amount from the skeletons besides these forensic reconstructions, but they've been going on for a long time. Starting, probably the most famous one was Philip, Alexander's father, because we had his, well, we think we had his skeleton
Come to you
from
now.
Bergina.
Yes, I want from the middle row. Yes, and back. Yes.
Is it possible that this last object was from an earlier era and was repurposed in a later era?
Sorry, I can't,
We didn't hear it clearly.
Is it possible that this final object
Oh,
Yes.
yeah. Is
was
later?
actually from an earlier era and was repurposed?
oh, like
reused.
an heirloom kind of thing?
Right,
Yeah.
hundreds of years.
No, I don't think so, because it's got this Latin inscription on it, and it's, you know, it has this reference to Christianity, and the rest of the hoard, it's all of a piece. I don't think, there are some other objects here, horse trappings and things like that, but I think they're all pretty much at the same date. Those four little objects in the middle, there are actually representations of TK, of different cities of the Mediterranean, Alexandria, Rome. So, you know, it's guys. No.
Okay, yes.
I've come away this evening with a better view of the expression opening Pandora's box.
Yeah, right.
Usually, you open Pandora's box, you expect problems to come out. You open Pandora's box, and there's nothing there. However, that could be worse of a problem because your expectations are destroyed. There's no jewelry in it. That's a comment.
I did have another interpretation about this. The Pythos, as I say, we know from Homer that there was a Pythos with evils and goods, and she opened the evil one, okay, and everything came out, except at the end, Zeus intervened and he put the lid down, so Elpis stayed inside. This was hope. But because it's a jar of evils, I think this is false hope. That they didn't let false hope, because if they let false hope out of the jar, nobody would do anything. Everything would be false. I mean, the Greeks always had a good and a bad, you know, good Eris, bad Eris, whatever, you know, so good hope, bad hope. And so I think it was false hope that was kept inside.
Yes.
Hi, thank you, that was so interesting. As a psychotherapist, I was particularly interested in the part where women are the mourners, women are the mourners and the ones that are around birth. And rather it being something that men didn't want to do, I was thinking of it more as men using women to express emotions that would make the men appear more vulnerable.
Yeah, that's a good point, because they, you know, there was a lot of wailing and, you know, you could hire mourners at funerals to make a big, you know, to-do about it.
Like if you had permission to let out
Yeah,
songs that
yeah.
made you either sad or scared, whereas
Yeah.
men had to be brave and courageous.
Right, it wasn't manly to show emotion.
A lot hasn't changed since modern times.
You're right, you're right.
Well, I have a follow-up question now. The funeral games, those are male prerogatives.
Yes, but those funeral games were mostly an epic, and you know what they were used for? They were used to divvy up the possessions of the deceased hero. So they'd have a horse race. Whoever won that got his concubine and a nice bronze tripod. But that's what the funeral games were for. I mean, they honored the dead, but they were a way of dispersing his
I'm
goods.
thinking of emotion, that you're physically active also after that. But that's very interesting.
Well, there was a whole exhibition on Greek emotions, if you want to know more about emotions. So, yeah.
Yes, I had. Okay, we have time for like 2 questions. Yes.
Just going back to the earliest figures you showed, very
Oh, yeah, oh, yeah.
from the sick lady, I know I'm not pronouncing it correctly, the
Cycladic?
the Cycladic figures, and I've seen them so much in museums, I'm not a scholar. But I'm just curious, sort of, this is a very broad question, but you don't have, at that period, it's most of what is in museums that I've seen in these, are these female fertility figures. Have there been any male figures found from that period, or are they?
Yes, yes. Just go up to the Metropolitan Museum and you'll see some. There are musicians seated playing lyres, so it, you know, like a Homeric bard kind of, or, you know, like Homer. And there are occasionally, I think there's a big Cycladic museum in Athens. It's got a warrior wearing a baldric with some kind of weapon. So yes, there are, but there's so few, you know, compared to the.
It's interesting in the time period that shift from, you know, most of the figures being these fertility figures and maybe a slightly more matriarchal or less, you know, the shift in what's being represented.
Well, I mean, what they used to say is, well, they represent the period of matriarchy, and then they went on to patriarchy. So, but you know, that doesn't really work very well. Yeah, yes.
The messaging that you see many images from this time period, and there's a message in a bottle here that transcends time. What can you tell us about the messaging that these people in this time period are trying to convey to the future generations? And the second part of that question is, what morality were they trying to explain, and is it still current today in our society? Is it with us today?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, take the Parthenon. I mean, there were serious messages on this building about Athens and about religion, about their, you know, honoring the gods, because all the gods are shown there, all 12, not just Athena, who's on the frieze. But I think their message is, here we go, you know, this is us. Some people think it's, you know, so idealized. It's, I think it was Boardman, John Boardman, a great scholar, who said they didn't look up there and said, here we go. I think that's exactly what they said. You know, they looked up and they saw these Athenians in their tribal ranks, and, you know, and they were probably picked out in color and things like that. So I think, you know, if you look to the Parthenon, to the imagery and to the messages there, it is for all time. That's why it's important that I get back together again.
Yes, we
We'll
agree.
go into that. We'll go into that.
I have to tell you, I did have a line, and I took it out, I didn't want to be political, about Elgin, without permission, proper permission, removing the marbles. So I did, but I decided I shouldn't be political. I feel political about it. It is my favorite building, and I want you all to know, in terms of a topic, we have had more programs about the Parthenon than on any other topic here. So if it can come up, I'm so glad you mention it every talk.
I do.
We try to
Can't help it.
also.
Can't help it.
I want to thank you so much for the club, for the American School, for an absolutely splendid talk. It was just wonderful. Okay, wonderful. I want you all to know that our next two programs will be virtual lectures. On February the 8th at 1 p.m., in collaboration with the St. Petersburg Celebration of the Arts, British Museum expert Julian Reed speaks about, and here I mispronounce it again, my apologies, Senababad, father of his people. And on March 15th at 1 p.m., co-hosted our committee with the Roundtable Committee, Cyril Lipsky of the Metropolitan discusses Cromer, ancient sculpture in color. But you can return here. On March 30th at 6:30 in the Grand Gallery, Nicholas Cahill will give the biennial lecture on Harvard's excavations at Sardis. So please join us for this on many programs, and we have recordings online. This will be in around a week or two. So love to see you all again at the club. And I thank you, Jenifer. It was brilliant.